it's Stephen here for the Idiot Quilter. And today I am going to finish this quilt. Now what you see in front of you right now is my quilt back. And my first idiot move. I got the purple material and I didn't get enough of it. So I've had to piece it together. Now I could have gone out and bought a larger piece of this, but I didn't want to wait because I started this relatively early in the morning. And so what I did was I took some existing material, that's the burgundy ready kind of color in the middle, and I had to sew a couple of pieces of that together to make it long enough, and then I sewed it to the purple parts, which I just cut in half. So now it is much bigger, and I'm going to have a lot of overlap when I lay down the batting and the quilt on top of it, and I want a lot of overhang, not overlapping, overhang, because I'm going to be quilting this on my embroidery machine, my Janome 15,000 Horizon. I've already experimented with that on smaller pieces and it worked pretty good, so now I'm going to go all the way and do this full size quilt. I'm going to take you through my process bit by bit. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to turn this backing upside down so that my right side is facing on the bottom, and I'm going to lay my batting on top. Okay, so now I've laid down my batting and I've used a spray basting for this. I never pin, I always use a spray basting. I just find it's easier to work with than pinning. And now I'm going to put the quilt top on top of it, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to spray baste it. Okay, so now I've got my quilt top laid down and basted to the batting. Now I've left a lot of extra batting and backing all the way around the quilt top, much larger than what the quilt top is. Reason being is I need some surface to hoop so I can move out right to the edges of the quilt with the quilting that I'm going to use on the embroidery machine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my computer and print out the embroidery template or the quilting template that will help me to line up the hoop. Okay, so I figured out my spacing, and this is my design, and you have to hoop it in sections. So you start in the very center, and I've got everything threaded, I've got everything set up, and away we go. Now I had already pulled up my bobbin thread on here, and I'd let it stitch a few stitches and cut off my trailing thread. So now it'll do this whole pattern. It's over here, and it says it's going to take about 6 minutes left to do this. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'll move from one section to the next section. And I don't think I have to worry too much about matching up the pattern here, because this being the kind of pattern that it is, I don't think it'll be very obvious if it's not quite perfectly aligned. Okay, we had disaster. The thread all balled up and caught in the machine. I had to shut it down. I had to go in, remove my needle plate and my bobbin and untangle everything, and it made big bird's nests thread on the back of this, and I'm really not liking how this is working. So I'm going to actually stop while I'm ahead. I'm going to pull all these stitches out of the quilt carefully, and then I'm going to go on YouTube and see if I can find some videos about quilting with this machine, because I'm not doing something right. Idiot move. Okay, I've started again. I ripped out all those stitches on that first pattern that I used, and I've gone to a stippling pattern. And I think what my problem might have been was that although it was under the quilting section, I think some of those patterns are more for actual embroidery onto a quilt as opposed to doing standard quilting. I think the only pattern they really have that does this, although I did use the feathers one, is this, the stippled look, as they call it. So I'm trying this again. Took me a while to rip all those stitches out, but they're gone. And now I'm doing this stippling pattern, and we'll see how this works out. Okay, so my first little part is done, and I have flipped the quilt over so you can see the back. And the back is looking pretty good. The only problem is, you see this? In a few little spots, I've got something called feathering, where you get these eyelash-like little things, and that often happens when you go around curves, and might have something to do with the tension. But it's only happening in a few spots, and I'm not going to let it bother me on this one. We'll see how this looks as I get on with it. So I'm going to carry on here and go to the next section. Okay, so now I'm working on the next section, and this is going to take a while because each section takes about 5 minutes to do, and I probably should be using the paper printout grid that you can create using the Aquafil system, but I'm not. I'm just sort of eyeballing it, but with the help of the plastic overlay grid on this. I don't think it matters that much if they don't match exactly, because this kind of overall stippling pattern, nobody can really tell where it starts and where it stops. So let's hope this carries on and still works as well as it seems to be working right now. I'm still a little concerned about that feathering. Maybe I can find something on the internet about that. I have a feeling it's a tension issue. Okay, it took me 2 days, but I finally got this whole quilt quilted. And I learned a few things about how to use my machine with this. And now I'm going to point out the really stupid thing that I did. I was trying to square this quilt up on the sides, and although they look relatively square right now, I had to keep cutting off strips. See that top border at the very top? The ones on the side, the same color, were supposed to be the same width as that. It's not how it turned out. I got that all quilted. The quilting is all gone from it. And now all I have is 1-inch strips that run down that. And even those are a little uneven. I'm hoping that I can disguise it a little bit once I put the binding on this. But I'm really a little bit PO'd at myself when I did this. And I need to really work on squaring up a quilt. In fact, I had squared it up when I made the sandwich, but I think it may have stretched a little bit underneath the frames that I was using to hold the quilt down when I was stippling it. So anyways, it's pretty, and maybe with a border on it or a binding on it, when I get that on it, it's going to look a little bit, it might be a little bit more forgiving as far as how straight things are, but this is definitely not a shill quilt. However, I've learned from my idiot moves. I know what I've done wrong, and I would be a real idiot if I repeat those mistakes again. So I will probably post a picture of this once I get the binding on it, or actually I think I'll wait to post this video until I do get the binding on it, and then you'll get the whole process. Okay, so I've decided I am not giving up on this quilt yet. Those spaces at the top and at the bottom that didn't have any stippling on them, I figured out how to get the sewing machine to do it down in those areas. I had to do a little bit of alteration. It isn't perfect, but on the front anyways, you really can't tell. On the back, there's a couple of little gaps that you might notice, but considering that a quilt is often hung or on a bed, and you don't really look at the back all that closely, I'm not going to worry about it. Now what I have to worry about to save this is, what am I going to do about this border? And I think I'm just going to leave it as it is, because I really can't take it apart. And I'll bind the quilt, and hopefully the binding will sort of divert the eye away from the unevenness and how narrow that piece is. It might actually turn out to look more like, almost like a piping once I get the binding on, but I don't know if that's going to work or not. We'll see. But if anything, this is a learning quilt, meaning I've done the whole thing on my sewing machine, and including the quilting, and I learned how to use my new sewing machine with this. Okay, so my final step was to put on the binding, and you can see that it's on, and now the quilt is finished. And I'm trying to get it all into the shot here. It's kind of awkward, but there you go. And actually, now that the binding's on it, even though I had that problem with the border, it's not really that noticeable. So that kind of disguised it. So there we go. So I call this my learning quilt, because I learned a lot of things as I was working on this quilt. And I hope maybe some of the things that I did wrong that you've learned from so you don't make the same idiot mistakes that I made.